start here. You know what? All right. I'll tell you when to start because we're recording. But how long you got? Do you have to leave? What time you need to leave?
10:47. I'm in good shape. 45 minutes.
You got 40?
Even more.
Okay.
I've got, if we can have it wrapped up in an hour,
Okay.
I can leave at like 12:15. I just got to do a few things.
Okay. Good deal.
Yeah.
Okay. So we will start it at the 30-second mark. So give me 3 seconds.
Okay.
Welcome to If the Walls Could Talk in Buffalo. Don, how you doing?
Great. Yourself, Josh?
I'm doing great. It's a beautiful day outside, and we're going to talk some drought era GMs. This is part 2 of our series from Marv to Brandon Beane, and basically the beginnings.
Whoa.
Oh, Jesus. Let's start again. We'll start at the 1 minute mark.
Okay.
I put Levy to Beane on here. Why did I do that? It's Polian to Beane.
No, it is today, though. Today.
That's why I got
yeah.
Okay, but it's called
the
Polian to Beane.
Yeah.
Got it. All right. We're gonna start it again here at the 1:10 mark. Welcome to If the Walls Could Talk in Buffalo. Don, how you doing?
Great. Yourself, Josh?
Doing great. It's a beautiful day out, and we're gonna dive into the happy topic of the drought era Bills. This is part 2 of our show from Polian to Beane. The rise and the fall of all of the GMs in the Bills' last 30 years, and that you were there for.
Yeah, you've mentioned to me in recent days, weeks, whatever, how kind of surprised you are by the level of fan interest in the teams. I mean, can't argue, painful and close here, close there, just never, the mediocrity and everything, but still, a younger generation of fans, that's what they had. And unfortunately, they've been rewarded with this now.
And as we get into it, I think it's going to become really obvious just how amazing it is that the team is still here.
True.
After going through an era of football that was kind of unprecedented in the NFL. Like, what an odd time, what an odd scenario, with the ownership and playing a home game out of the country and the stadium and just everything in flux and not winning for such a long period of time where it seemed like hope had been obliterated, like Red and Shawshank would say. Hope is a dangerous thing.
Yeah, right.
And there was no Andy Dufresne to really give you a lot of hope that this was going to ever turn around.
I would argue we had hope every year, but it just was you never sustained it because you never got that result of getting in the playoffs, and that's what it was all about.
Sure.
That's by drought, the definition.
Before we get into it, I'm just going to share a small story from last night. I was doing a little bit of research for the show today, and because some of the drought era stuff really kind of blends together for me, because for a while there I was a little bit detached from the team. And I went back on YouTube and I was watching some of the games that I was on the sidelines for. And I came across the last game that I was on the sideline for in 2000 against the Seahawks. We had traveled there. The new stadium was being built. They had demolished the Kingdome, and we played at Husky Stadium. And it caught my eye that Ralph Wilson was at the game and in the owner's box by himself because John Butler had been let go.
Right.
And, Ralph was traveling with the team as like the owner, obviously, and then also kind of like the de facto GM, observing everything, whatever else. And wow, the special teams was bad that day. We let up a kick return touchdown, and the ESPN broadcast of Mike Patrick and Joe Theismann and Paul McGuire just were killing the special teams. They showed Ronnie on the sidelines probably 20 times, which for a coordinator is a lot.
Yeah.
And there was graphics about how it's the first time in NFL history that all 4 of the phases of special teams were last in the league. And then Steve Christie was squibbing the ball the rest of the game because he basically gave up on covering kicks. Their average starting field position was the 45-yard line. So I watched that, and I like to go back and watch it to see how many times I can notice myself on the sideline, play a little Where's Waldo, and see if I, picking my nose or doing something ridiculous or chewing my little straws that I used to chew on the sideline. But wow, it struck me that Ralph was there in kind of a GM capacity because he had let go of the GM before the end of the season, which was rare. And Doug Flutie had a great game.
Did he?
And he and Eric Moulds made the Pro Bowl. They scored 42 points in the game. And looking at that game, it was a team that hadn't quit on their coach and finished 8-8. Had a rough stretch before then, a lot of injuries. Hadn't quit on their coach. Wade was 29-19 at the end of those 3 years. And I saw myself with about 2 minutes left on the sideline, and I would have bet good money that we would have been back there next year. It was the way it all kind of went down. It struck me that team, there was still potential there, especially on offense.
Yeah, you said you were 7-4 that season at one point, right?
7-4 after the Kansas City game, and then it all fell apart.
Yeah.
All right. So anyway, speaking of falling apart, we ended it with Tom Donahoe, kind of the end of Tom Donahoe's reign. Yep. What were your memories of him getting let go? Did you feel like it was time? And then obviously I'm going to ask you the question that I asked you with all of the coaches getting let go. Mm-hmm. What was your level of concern for your own personal job at that point? So we're talking about the January of 2006. So after the 2005 season.
Yeah, it was maybe the first time, because Tom had entrusted me with more responsibility. I was named director during his tenure.
Director of football administration.
Okay. Yeah. So I took on a lot of football administrative duties, as the title would suggest.
Was there any trepidation on your part to get closer to the football side of things, because with more responsibility comes more risk of getting let go?
I understood the risk, but I felt it was time, and I felt like it was a bit hedged because I wasn't in football personnel. I worked very closely with those people, but my job was to help the scouts, coaches, trainers, video, do their jobs better by taking more administratively off their plates. And I took a lot of pride in it, but I also understood that football was now in my title, which you're getting a little close to that chopping block now.
Were you the only candidate for this job? Was it who did it before you?
They did. They actually made that title for me.
Okay.
Yeah, they had Jim Overdorf being vice president of football administration. So,
so he basically got kind of bumped up to be the cap guy, and then you took on all of the less glamorous roles of his job. Is that fair to say?
Travel, workers' comp. Okay. Every time a player was hurt, that had to be dealt with.
Was there a director of football administration at that point in time for every team?
It was a position that was, I don't know if it's every team, but many teams had that position. So it wasn't like they made up the title. It was like, hey, we know this team, they have a director of football administration. That's kind of exactly what you're doing. We're gonna name you that.
Okay. Did you have a contract?
No, but it was an agreement that getting a contract is like a double-edged sword,
because they can let you go, right?
Yeah. So I, they talked about let's play that out later. But then when Tom left, it was just a year-to-year thing that continued.
Okay, so you're named to this position. Obviously, you have a good working relationship with the GM. Mm-hmm. You feel as long as he's there, you're good,
right?
So because there's this dual dynamic going on, right? Like where you want the team to win, you want all of the success that comes with that, but then personally, selfishly, like you have a family, you have a career, and you got to look out for yourself at the same time. Right. So as long as you're in with the GM, as long as the GM's there, you're fine.
Yeah.
Okay, so he gets let go. Not a surprise.
No, it wasn't. I think, we couldn't get out of that middle, and the media was crushing him because he got short with them a few times, and we would watch the press conferences in our office TVs and just kind of, Tom, we know where you're coming from. We understand why you would say that, but did you have to say it that way? These guys are going to eat you up. I mean, you're just asking for a fight, and the press was crushing them.
Sure. I may or may not have enjoyed some of those. We were probably looking at those press conferences from a different lens at that point in time. Right. It's funny how perspectives can change things. So, okay, so he gets let go. So when the GM gets let go, how does that work? Like, does he get called to Detroit? Okay.
Oh yeah, you get called to Detroit to go to Mr. Wilson's home, and everyone back in One Bills Drive is just kind of hand wringing, like, what's going to happen? Is he going to get out alive?
Sure.
And usually, before he even got back from Detroit, we knew, we had heard the result.
Okay, so he gets let go. You're 1 to 10. Your job status 6. Okay, so tell me what happens next. How do we get to Coach Levy becoming the GM?
It was a real surprise because I think maybe the only parallel, I think, when George W. Bush was running and looking for a vice presidential candidate, he asked Dick Cheney to oversee,
right?
And then all of a sudden he's like, "Oh, how about it was just you?"
Sure.
You know? So that's maybe the best parallel is Mr. Wilson asked Marv to help him lead the search, and during all
I've looked everywhere, and the best candidate is me.
Yeah, well, Mr. Wilson said it to him, and then Marv said, "Are you sure?" Because the salary cap is not something, and he's like, "No, we have Jim Overdorf. He's very good at it, and you just make the ultimate decisions." And he contemplated it and said,
"Do you remember? I'll come in." Do you remember any other candidates that they were looking at the time?
There were some, yeah. Man, there were a couple names out there of people who had been GM before, and I want to say there was like a head coach that had never been a GM, and so we were thinking, oh, he might be good, but I don't remember who they were. Sure. But if I could be reminded of them, I'd be like, oh yeah, but then
okay, so you got to walk me through this. So this is Marv Levy.
Yeah,
this is a Hall of Fame coach. This is your mentor, friend. Like, your relationship with Marv is unique, and you were real young, but then you were there for the entire thing, and I know how much he cares about you, and I certainly know how much you care and respect for him.
Right.
Like,
yeah,
there had to be kind of a dual reaction here. There's Don Purdy, the human being. Oh my God, Marv's the GM. I'm good. Right.
I felt really good.
But then at the same time, it's like, wait a minute, Marv Levy's the GM? Like,
he's going to need a lot of help. Yeah, he's going to need a lot of help.
What was the reaction in the building, and then what was the reaction like around the league?
Around the league, I'm not so sure. I think they were like, let's wait and see. We know he's smart. We know he's respected. We're just not sure what they're going to ask him to do. The game has changed a lot. He didn't know the salary cap. Admittedly, he went on the radio a lot and just, if they got a salary cap question, let's talk to Jim Overdorf on that. And so I remember one of the first meetings we had. It was in Mr. Wilson's office, and they asked Jeff Littman.
And who's Jeff Littman again?
Okay, Jeff Littman was the treasurer. He was Mr. Wilson's right-hand man.
He signed the checks.
Anything that had to do with money, it was him. He was genius with money. And he started to become really involved because the lockout was looming.
Okay.
It looked like that was going to happen, and the team was going to have to control, as a small market team, control expenses, be more wary of them than they had before. And if a small market team wanted to survive, yet we wanted to still be competitive, the roster had some pretty good players on it. So we had a meeting in Mr. Wilson's office. Mr. Wilson wasn't there. It was Jeff Littman sitting in Mr. Wilson's seat. Then it was Marv and John Guy and Jim Overdorf and me, and I think Kevin Meegank might have been in the meeting too. And Jeff starts on the salary cap, goes deep into the weeds, this and that likely to be earned, for like an hour and a half. And we take a bathroom break, come back after 10 minutes, and Marv says, okay, can we start this meeting over again at this is the salary cap?
Wow.
And we all just started laughing so hard. He's like, folks, listen. He goes, it's clear to me, Jim, I hear you talking. You know what to do. Just tell me, what's it going to cost for this player? I know talent. I want to build around it. But if we're going to be successful, that's the way it has to play out.
So we've talked before in the last episode, Bill Polian was all encompassing.
Yeah.
He had hands everywhere in the organization.
Right.
John Butler, on the other hand, was all football. Didn't care about marketing, didn't give a rat's ass what was going on the other side of the building.
Yep.
So Tom Donahoe was back towards the Bill Polian model of having his hands in everything. And wanting to be in charge. Marv clearly was just football.
It was just football.
Just football, and not even the financial side of football, just the scouting, player development, decision maker
based on what's brought to him. And it's funny because I went to Jim Overdorf's office. I don't know if it was that day after the meeting or another day, and Russ he was like a VP then.
Russ Brandon
of marketing and maybe business administration, something like that. He was a VP, and I remember he came into Jim's office and he goes, I don't know how I should feel about this, but Marv just came in my office and He said, Russ, just so you know, I'm going to oversee football and everything. You still oversee the parking lots and all that stuff. It's all yours.
The parking lots.
Yes, that's what he said. Russ said, I think that's good for me. I have a continuation of what I'm doing, but clearly,
it's funny because obviously you're much closer to coach and all that. But I mean, anybody who's ever met him has the utmost respect for him. At the same time, it's very quaint that he called like the entire marketing staff of an NFL team like running the parking lots. Like, it just shows you that he just not that he didn't care, but he just didn't care. Like, he's a football coach. He's a football coach. So so there's no real delicate way to ask this.
Well, he understood too that he was going to have to be out there in the media. Last thing he wanted was to look like he didn't know what he was talking about.
Sure.
So he wanted to know who did what. So at least in an interview, he said, hey, well, I'll deflect that to Jim Overboard for Russ Brandon.
Okay.
You know what I mean?
So he's, at this point, he's 80 years old, right?
Something like that. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Did you feel like he was any different than he had been 10 years ago?
No, other than not still running around One Bills Drive. You remember?
Okay. I do.
You remember?
I do. Yes.
He would run. Yeah. Yes. In his 60s. He wasn't running anymore, but he was still in remarkably super coherent.
Okay.
Hadn't lost a thing. And physically just looked a little older. But
so his lack of knowledge was just because of a lack of experience. He had never been a GM, rather than a cognitive decline. Is that fair to say?
Very fair.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, but he's 80 years old, and the owner is 85 years old,
something like that.
So, I mean, gosh, that's a rough look. I mean,
yeah.
So you have these two figureheads. You have Jeff Littman, who is Mr. Wilson's guy. Maybe take a little sidebar here. What other companies did Ralph Wilson run in Detroit?
It
was called Ralph Wilson Enterprises. So people knew him as the owner of the Bills. But what else did he do?
Yeah, it was insurance mostly. So we were self-insured. It's boring, I know, but that's where he.
Is that where he made his money?
He made his money in horse racing very early on to buy the
horse racing.
Yeah, in Saratoga.
Nice.
Yeah, but then he loaned Al Davis the money to keep the Raiders afloat, and famously. And
so just a businessman, entrepreneur.
Yeah. He owned construction. He owned a TV station in Colorado.
Okay, just a myriad of businesses. So it was Ralph Wilson Enterprises. So it was an umbrella company based in Detroit.
Right.
The Bills were obviously his biggest asset, but it was in Detroit. So the corporate office of the Bills was in Detroit, correct?
Yeah, we talked to him every single day. I was on the phone with the Detroit office.
How many people worked in the Detroit office?
Yeah, 7 or 8.
Okay.
Like
Frank Winicki.
Winicki,
So they ran Ralph Wilson Enterprises, which the biggest asset of that was the Buffalo Bills, clearly. Okay. So Jeff Littman. So between Jeff Littman, Russ Brandon, and Jim Overdorf, they were kind of the three people behind the owner and the GM who were kind of running the show on a day-to-day basis at that point. Is that correct? Is that fair to say?
Yeah, that's fair. That covers pretty much everything right there.
Okay.
Yeah, not so much. The only thing it doesn't really cover would be the player personnel, which would have been John Guy on the pro side, and on the college side, holy cow, someone was elevated at that point.
Do you feel like anything? How was it different? How was the building different going from Tom Donahoe to Marv Levy?
Marv was very friendly in ways that, but there were people. Woody, I get to call him out on this too, but I remember, when Marv came back. He came back, the organization was much bigger than it was when he was there as a coach. That's why he remembered me so well, and others like, hey, oh, you're still here. And so he kind of leaned on us to ask who did what in a fast way. But there were purchases that would have normally had to go through an approval process, big purchases with equipment and strength and conditioning, and some of them went to Marv because they knew him. Say, hey, Marv, we have this great machine that we think we should buy. Sounds good to me. I trust your judgment. And all of a sudden, we get this $55,000 invoice for something and be like, whoa, this wasn't approved. Oh, I talked to Marv, and we're like, there's still a process.
Right.
Marv's going to be. We'll explain, but no. It's not
did the guys who were there during the 90s were they treated differently not intentionally, but Woody, Hojo was there. I'm assuming still then.
Yeah.
Like they've got credibility with the GM that a person who hadn't been there wouldn't have. I mean, Marv had been with these guys for great years.
Henry Cantu and Video,
right?
And
so
Bud Carpenter, the trainer. Yep.
It was all the same people. Did it feel like a '90s reunion?
It did, minus the roster.
Minus the roster. So everything non-football related really kind of felt like, God, it had to be such a.
Strange.
It was like strange, right?
Yeah,
like this. It would be like Bill Belichick becoming the GM of the Patriots 10 years from now.
Yeah. Well, right, exactly. Except, for Marv, we were like, oh, wouldn't it be great if we could win one for him? We had a good roster, but then we had meetings, which I was part of, and I kind of knew my place. So I didn't say a whole lot, but I was part of those meetings, and they put on the big board, okay, Lawyer Malloy, this is guy's gonna, if we keep him, this is the salary cap hit. And, here's how much, here's the pie, here's how much we have, here's how much he's going to take up. This is good. If we keep him, that's how much we're going to have left over. If we cut him, Malloy was one of the names that really bothered Marv that we had to get rid of for money reasons. And there were a few others, but he was like, look, I understand what you're saying, but who are we going to replace him with?
Sure.
Like who he didn't want to just start over.
Sure. Were the meetings as organized and as structured and ran as efficiently as with Tom Donahoe?
Yeah, even better, I have to say. They were just kind of depressing. We had some guys making a lot of money, and they were either just past their prime, and it looked more like a rebuild than we realized until we looked at the numbers.
Okay.
And Marv was kind of like, this is more challenging than I think I realized.
He realized that he stepped into a tough situation.
Yeah.
So Marv, 2 years, two seasons.
Mm-hmm.
And do you remember when he decided that he had enough? Was it kind of mutually agreed to that it was time to go? Like what? How did it end?
I think he thought, okay, I bridged the gap to another GM, but I think he just, the daily grind of it was much different as a GM as it is for a coach. I think he really missed the camaraderie of being a coach and talking to your assistant coaches all the time, even though, because he kind of boxed himself in when he first came in. He hired Dick Duran. He's like, I understand, my reputation as having been a head coach, but I hired him to do the job. I'm not going to hover over him and micromanage him.
Sure.
And so then when he made that public and private declaration, it was almost like I think he would have loved to be way more part of the coaching, but he promised he wouldn't.
He drew a clear line there.
Yeah.
And then to his credit, he kept his word.
Yeah.
But at the same, yeah. So what a bland era of Bills football. Right, like Dick Duran is probably most well known for loving to punt, and it was kind of and it was Trent Edwards, and I know that there was some promise there and whatever else, but it just
there were flashes of hope,
but just fizzled. Overall, just kind of bland.
Yep.
And now the Toronto series had begun, and we're going to get into that in a minute. So, do you remember when you found out that Coach was going to be let go or leave or retire?
Yeah, I'm going to mention this briefly in another earlier one, but I was on a bus. I want to say we were in Miami or New York or something, and I got a text message that Marv had just told someone in the locker room that he was going to leave, and Chuck Lester was in the seat in front of me, and I told Chuck, oh my gosh, he's like, no, he can't mean that. He can't possibly mean that. And I'm like, that's what it says, Chuck. And then the next day he did.
Sure. God, you and Chuck, 9 lives each, man. 9 lives each for the two of you.
Well, if you're going to gauge success and longevity, you got to give him a way more credit for somehow staying on coaching staff.
It's unbelievable how many lives.
Right? Yeah.
I always remember Luck Chester was his nickname, and I can always remember Chuck Lester yelling from his office to John Levera, who was the defensive line coach, like talking about a guy or a play, like the fact that they just didn't collaborate together and sit in the same room. So he would just be yelling back and forth in between offices, watching film for hours at a time, like just yell, not adversarial yelling, but just talking about things. It's like, why don't you guys just sit together? Like they're just anyways,
like a game of chicken.
Yeah. So okay. So what's your number at when you find out that Marv is leaving?
Boy, it was down to between a 4.5.
Okay, so you felt a little less safe?
Yeah.
Okay, you felt like okay, I'm. So then let's walk through the next thing here. So Marv gets let go. What happens next?
It became kind of like, only way I could describe it is it sort of felt like a GM by committee, in which Russ Brandon was the head of the committee, but
the committee to find someone. Okay, so
no, to be the GM.
Did they do a search?
I don't remember the search for a new GM as well as I do. I don't even know if there was one, to be honest with you. I just think that Russ convinced Jeff
Lippman
and Mr. Wilson that he had been being groomed to be a football guy all the way back to John Butler when he came as the marketing guy.
I remember.
And he goes, I feel like it's time that I can do this. I'll need help too, like
Marv did. Do you think Marv leaving was his tacit approval that, do you think Mr. Wilson took that as, oh, he thinks Russ can do it too?
Yeah, I think he did.
Okay.
I think Russ convinced him that, look, I've got Jim as a great cap guy. I know John is knows
you're
talent,
basically a crude way to say it is you're replacing an 82-year-old figurehead with how old was Russ then? 40?
Something like that.
45-year-old figurehead. And you're just improving the public facing image of the team. Not that, Marv is wonderful, amazing, but he's 82 years old.
Yeah.
And so you're basically just going to like GM 2.0 of delegator / facilitator of all of these other things that we already have in place that we all love and trust. Blah, blah, blah.
That's what it felt like.
Okay. What was the reaction inside the building?
There was skepticism that, I think most people thought that, we'd really like to have that quote football guy there making the decisions, but we were, everyone, I like to say, willing to give it a chance. He didn't have a choice.
Right. Do you think a lot of this, so it's pretty interesting that Ralph Wilson went to the president model with Tom Donahoe.
Yeah.
After having never done the president model before. It doesn't work out. And then his next two hires are like his guys.
Yeah.
His guys. I mean, Marv Levy is, of course, his guy, and that's not a disparaging thing. And then Russ Brandon was his hand-picked marketing guy from, quote unquote, the Wonder Kid when he came from the Marlins. So he pendulum swung way.
It really did, and Ralph wanted to win. Mr. Wilson, I'm sorry.
Oh, it's fine.
Yeah, right. But no one questioned that.
I've called him other names. God rest his soul, but I certainly have. I'm sorry.
I know. I remember that year, man. But I feel like he was also knowing that as a small market team, in order to stay competitive, you needed to fill that stadium. And he gave Russ a lot of credit. I'm sure Russ deserved a lot of credit for finding ways to market the team that, even bad years, mediocre years, hopeful years, but still not making the playoffs, they're still selling out all the games except for like a December game against Cleveland or whatever.
Who do you think was advising Ralph Wilson? Like who did he trust? Because these are out of the box decisions. Like these are around the NFL. I would venture to guess that the 3-person stretch of Marv Levy, Russ Brandon, and then Dwight Adams is pretty unique in NFL history for a 3 GM stretch.
Yeah. But at that point, it was Jeff Lippman. Jeff was in Detroit.
Okay.
And he was talking to Mr. Wilson every single day. And I remember Rusty Jones came back to be the strength and conditioning coach, but there was already Mike Mularkey already had Brad Roll. So, but then Rusty interviewed with Mike Mularkey, and Mike was like, Brad Roll's going to be my strength coach. But after interviewing Rusty, he's like, you can't leave. We got to find a way for you to work together. I'm actually going to put you over Brad Roll, and I'm going to create a new position for you, and it's going to be awesome. So Rusty tried it, but Rusty liked to be right there working with the guys in the locker room, in the strength and the weight room. And he wasn't there. Brad was the guy. He kind of also respected the fact, like Marv did, that, okay, I'll only be there kind of as an overseeing everything. Sure. But when Rusty left and took a job with the Bears, he went to Mr. Wilson and said, look, I'm going to be honest with you. There are guys in this building that are being underutilized. And he told Mr. Wilson that I was one of them. So Mr. Wilson called me in the office, and Rusty told me that he said this. I don't know what's going to come of it, but he goes, I had this conversation with Mr. Wilson, and I don't be surprised if he wants to hopefully talk to you about taking on more responsibility. I got a little nervous because he bypassed Jim, which sure. I worked directly for. But so sure enough, I got a call into Mr. Wilson's office, and he said, Don, certain person told me that they feel like you could give us a lot more. How do you feel about that? I said, I appreciate that. I said, sure, I'm willing to take on more. And he goes, well, let me ask you, do you feel like you could work with Jeff Littman? And I'm like, absolutely.
Yeah. You already do in any way.
Yeah, sure. I said, for sure. And he goes, well, I'd like to do that, but understand you're going to be working with him a lot more. And then they brought me in to do some more of the salary cap. And man, in retrospect, I almost wish I would have declined it, because it was, I wasn't sure what they were asking me to do. And on top of everything else that I had been given when Tom Donahoe was there, adding the salary cap, Jeff spoke another language. And so I gave him what I thought he wanted. And we both kind of mutually agreed, look, let's have Kevin Meegan's doing a lot of this right now. He loves it. Let's have me stick with this. I'll take on more administrative responsibility, but give Kevin more of the cap. And it works out.
That's a really interesting story. You hadn't told me that before. And I guess it's hearing this from afar, like, or from my point of view. And I'm hoping that people are enjoying the episode. Like and subscribe to the show.
Hey, there you
go.
I
remembered for once. So, but it's really interesting that nothing was like delineated or clear. Like, you got more responsibility in like these small chunks, and even the hiring of the GMs was like this weird, like, not nepotism, but like promotion from within, and everything was like, it doesn't feel like Brandon Beane would never run an organization like that. And Mr. Wilson, it's almost like whichever way the wind was blowing that day, or if he was emotional, like when he fired John Butler, he was pissed off because he had flown to San Diego and wasn't returning. Like, he seemed like a pretty emotional decision maker.
True,
which sometimes can be great and sometimes isn't. And it just feels like when he let Tom Donahoe go, he was going to go back to all his security blankets. Mm-hmm. You bring Rusty Jones back, you bring Marv Levy back, you got Russ, even someone like you, like, you're familiar, you worked with his daughter for years and years and years. And it was like, we're just going to shrink the circle here, and we're going to run an NFL team with all of the guys that have been around me for 25 years. Is that fair?
Yeah. And I would like to think, you just said, hopefully it's interesting, because normally with maybe any NFL, maybe any pro team, when you hear that there's an announcement that there's been a hire or a promotion, you don't see how the sausage gets made.
Sure, right.
You just see the final product, the shiny announcement.
Yes,
you don't know some of the things that almost happened.
Right.
Some of the conflict that there was.
Right. And then it's not always like really well thought out. It's not always well communicated. It feels like, and I guess it almost, like, the fact that the football team wasn't good clearly was not directly caused by you or Russ or even Coach Levy, but just the whole decision-making process from the top just seemed really scattered and not well thought out and well designed. And it's probably not a coincidence that the football team was kind of the same, right?
Well, yeah. And it's not an excuse, but the headwinds we were facing.
Oh boy, here we go.
With New England.
Here comes the big bad. But you can still get a wild card.
Exactly. But that's what I'm saying is that there was just no room for error.
Sure, but it was not.
It was good enough.
But so think about the Patriots.
Yeah.
In that era.
Stability.
It is stability, well-oiled machine.
Yep.
Bill Belichick, every detail. I'm like they just wouldn't. This felt like the Bills felt like a family business.
Yeah.
Right. Like a family run. We're gonna just get the band back together here and see if it works. Whereas the Patriots were like the Soviets in the 80s, like the Soviet hockey team, right? Like just a well-oiled machine.
They had the greatest quarterback of all time, but at the same time with Belichick, you know, they just won, and you know, his coordinators would go off to be head coaches, and they wouldn't succeed.
New stadium. The stadium's got all this development around it. Meanwhile, you know, you were playing in an old stadium. You're playing one game a year out of the country at home. There's all these rumors about whether the team's going to stay in Buffalo.
Right.
Like
Toronto, this thing was happening.
If you juxtapose the two franchises off the field, take all the on the field stuff away, the Tom Brady and all the success, just off the field. Like if you were going to choose a model that you'd want to run an NFL team
you want that stability without question. Like I say, like all of his coordinators that went out, they weren't successful head coaches.
Right.
They got away from that. And how many can you name?
Sure. Charlie Weiss. Charlie Weiss went to Notre Dame and I facilitated my dad's early passing.
Sorry.
Oh no. I always call him the man that killed my father because his era of Notre Dame football. Oh boy,
that's quite a claim.
That was it's a little hyperbole, but it helped me get over the early loss of my dad. All right, let's get back to it here. So we are at the Russ Brandon era. Which is not really a well-defined era. Was there an announcement? He's the GM.
I don't remember one.
Okay.
I don't remember. I remember that all of a sudden somebody, Tony Addio's assistant, was like, I got to get, she just told me one day, I got to order new letterhead for Russ because he's to put GM on it. Like, oh, okay.
So there was no formal announcement, no press conference.
Just like kind of slowly morphed into it under the radar.
Do you think they were embarrassed by it?
No, but I don't know. I don't know what to think. It was just, but you're right. The fact that there was no announcement that I can recall. Somebody can call me on this. Sure. But I don't remember one.
You weren't at a press conference.
No.
For a new GM. Nope. I mean, this is the GM. This is one of 32 jobs in the NFL.
It's a big deal.
It's a GM of an NFL football team.
Right.
Do you remember, like, were the meetings similar to what the meetings were under Marv and Donahoe and Butler and Polian? Like did he?
No. I mean, yes, there were meetings, but they didn't bring in all of the player personnel or other people. They became real tight and small, and they didn't really include.
It wasn't real collaborative.
Not with player personnel or even someone like myself. No.
Okay, so you were maybe more on the outside during these couple of years.
Just keep doing what you're doing,
and let the big boys handle the big boy decisions.
Yeah.
Okay. When was it clear that it wasn't working, other than day one?
I mean, 2009. We had Lee Evans on the program, and you look at that roster, it should have won a lot more games. I mean, T.O. was fine. He had 800 yards and 60 catches or whatever, and he was not a problem in the building. He was viewed as a guy that could help sell
tickets. Yep.
Yeah. And
do you think the goal was to move to Toronto then?
We were promised in staff meetings that it was not the goal. That Toronto, they're just trying to solidify that market. We're going to go play up there. They're going to love us because they see us in person up in Toronto. They're going to then become fans and want to come to a whole bunch more games here. And
did they watch the actual games that happened in Toronto? Because some of them were god awful.
Man,
there's a bad football product.
It was hard. It was hard to watch. And I remember my job. I was in the locker room, they gave us the home team, the Blue Jays locker room, and it was beautiful. Oh my gosh! But we were in a conference room, and I had all the passports and the bus manifests that we had to send to the customs in order to, and it was a heavy lift. And Dave Wheat would be in there with me, and we would watch the game it was the manager of the Blue Jays' office.
Okay, sure.
Okay, beautiful conference room type thing. We had all the passports spread out, and that's where we would watch the game. and there was a delay, and you could hear. It was so frustrating because close game. Oh my gosh, what's going to happen? Quarterback drops back to pass. All of a sudden, this could be the game-winning drive, and you hear cheering. Like there's like 5 second delay.
Yeah,
and like, oh my gosh, here we go. All of a sudden, intercepted or what? The cheering was against us.
Okay. Well, yeah. I mean,
and the last time we were there, Doug Whaley, not to get ahead of ourselves, but Doug Whaley and Jim Monis had come in to watch the last 10 minutes of the game with us. Wherever they were in the stadium, they just didn't like it. They wanted to be there. And they were experiencing the same thing, watching it on screen. And like, are you serious? Like they couldn't, it became apparent to them, to whatever extent it was before that, this like solidified, we can't play here anymore.
Right.
We cannot waste a home game here. And it wasn't, the Canadian fans that come to the stadium are awesome, but the ones that went to those games, what we were told is, they love their Argonauts, and they really didn't like Buffalo sports because, they loved their Maple Leafs and they didn't like the Sabres. They had kind of a rivalry there. You see when the Maple Leafs come to the arena, you know what I mean?
Buffalo and Toronto are not friendly.
It wasn't, it did. Yeah. So it didn't work.
So, okay. So, but did you ever really think they were going to move to Toronto as long as Mr. Wilson was alive?
The only time it seemed like a possibility was when John Bon Jovi was.
Well, we're going to get to that.
Yeah. So
we're
going
to get to. Okay, but when Ralph was alive, you felt like the team would be here.
Yeah,
he wasn't going to move the team at 90 years old to Toronto.
Anywhere.
Okay, so that was really kind of a fool's errand, because whatever was gained in suite sales was lost competitively. And just another like kind of half-assed decision. Like, who gives away a home game to try to sell 10 suites?
They were division games too. It was the Jets. It was Miami. And I remember my daughter Anna went up to one of the games. I got her some tickets, and she was just like that. And she had been to Miami games at home, and was like, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe we gave up."
Did the players hate it?
They didn't. Yeah, they didn't.
The turf there sucked too, right?
I think Eric Wood, as deliberate and careful as he was with his words, after one of the games, kind of in an interview, just said something so uncharacteristic of him. Is like, this just isn't working for us.
How many years did they do it? Like 5,
something like that. Yeah, preseason game made perfect sense.
Sure, fine, yeah, but but a regular season home game when you're fighting uphill, to try to just make the playoffs.
Exactly.
Like, what a short-sighted, like frankly, just ridiculous decision.
And you saw like when we played the Dolphins and the Jets up there. I mean, they were more.
I mean, could you imagine now? Could you imagine now this year? What is the amount of money that the Pagulas would have to be offered to take the Miami home game and move it to Toronto?
Oh, I would like to think
$100 million.
I don't know, but
could you
it would be crazy.
I'm all flustered. Could you imagine the freak out of people everywhere if you just upped and they sold a home game?
Well, think about the players that we've talked to. How many of them came to that Dolphin game? It was either the regular season game at the end that clinched the division, right?
Yeah. Yes. The snow game.
Who some of the players that former players that came back, they took.
Yep.
They were like, I want my family. To experience the best of. They chose Miami, and it worked perfectly. Like the snow started in the fourth quarter.
Right. Of course, it was a story. Yeah, I was there. It was like a storybook game.
Yeah.
Yes, for sure. I just one more time. Could you imagine if they sold a division home game?
Nope.
In 2023.
No.
Like, they should be banned from the NFL. Like, any team, like, people are freaking out that there's a game in London. It's a home game. It's still obviously with the 17 game schedule, it's 9-8. So now it's 8-8, and it's still bounced. And that's going to be a very pro Bills crowd.
I would think
because the Bills cachet is better and all that.
Charlie, I want to talk to you about this. Sir Charlie, who we had on our program in London. We've been corresponding. I can't wait to share my experience with you on that.
I just, to me, that feels like the lowest moment of the drought era is when you're selling home games to Toronto in the hopes of getting 10 clubs, like suites sold. Cause that's all it was.
Yeah. And I think the first game, the first game was Miami. It went badly. I think it was lost at the very end. And yeah, no, it's unfathomable.
There were a lot of decisions that were made that were more about money and marketing and tickets than on the field. But honestly, that's what you get when you're putting people in positions that's what they do.
Yep.
And frankly, they're probably doing their job because that was what was wanted. Like, those decisions aren't made without the owner's consent.
Of course, he has to sign off on it, right? They lobby the idea to him, and the league has to sign off, but it's the owner's ultimate call, but he has to be sold on it.
Right. So, okay. So when did it become apparent that Russ was not the guy, and that he wasn't going to get fired from the organization, but step back or move up? He moved up to president.
Which is interesting, because in moving from GM to president, yes, you would oversee the whole organization, but in this case, not oversee football. And so it was really spurred by a coaching change after Dick Duran was let go, because those next 2 years were Dick Duran still was the head coach, but he was let go, and they brought in Chan Gailey and Buddy Nix, a brand new start. And one of the first things Buddy did when he came in is anyone that there was a way to watch a replay of the game, like to watch yesterday, like on a Monday morning, study the film of yesterday's game. People like Russ, he took that away. He said, "No, you don't need that. We're taking over football." Buddy had been, a scout with John Butler, and man, I saw a different side of Buddy. It was hopeful. I didn't know Chan Gailey at all, but I knew he had success with the Cowboys. So
there was a much more clear delineation between between head coach or between GM, president, football, non-football,
big time.
Okay, I think we're going to leave it there.
Okay,
for now. And then we're going to obviously have to do a part 3 of this podcast. So I'd like to thank everybody for watching. Hopefully this was enjoyable. Hopefully you like and subscribe the video, and we'll be back with part 3.
Sounds good.